So I just had this amazing conversation with Steve Kornacki from NBC News and NBC Sports. And I geek out on politics and sports. So it was awesome for me to be able to sit down with a star like Steve. One of the things that I found particularly interesting is there's so much noise out there about politics, and people prognosticate all day long about this, that, and the other thing. And obviously Trump draws eyeballs to screens and on both sides draws a reaction. But what Steve is focused on is the numbers and what the numbers are telling us. And in that there's, it's almost like a guiding light because it's data, it's objective. You can take anything and make it subjective, but he, as you will hear, he was objective and brought a kind of just the numbers balance to discussing what's going on in the country. And to me, there's some hopefulness in that because it's not one side or the other. It's kind of, well, what people are thinking, what are people thinking, and what's making people tick. And anyway, I hope you'll find it fascinating. I did, and thank you for listening.
We stand today
a date which will live in infamy.
I have a dream.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Steve, thank you so much for taking the time.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Steve, you've become this cult figure on television with your gray khakis and the big board, but who was Steve Kornacki before that?
I've always kind of been interested in numbers. I guess that's what you could say.
Okay.
And I can remember, what I can remember growing up watching elections on television, there was just always something about election night that it was exciting to me. I always looked forward to election nights in particular. I always remember the 2000 election. That was Bush and Gore, and that was ended up being the long recount. And I think everybody who remembers back then remembers Tim Russert on NBC with the grease board, writing out the states. They didn't have the fancy board. They didn't have all the technological capability we have. But just watching him play with all those scenarios as it came in really kind of just struck with me. And I saw, I think CNN was the first one to do one of those interactive screens on election night. This is probably about 20 years ago. And I remember seeing it and just it as like, I'd love to do this someday. I don't know how you go about doing it. I don't know what the career track is for it. So I just feel real lucky it kind of worked out that way.
And obviously you've been in and around media for a long time. When did you kind of get to the point where you felt like that was in reach?
It happened kind of unexpectedly. I had a pretty, I wouldn't say traditional, but I started out writing about politics, covering politics for in New Jersey. It was for a website. It was revolutionary at the time. There was no print product. It wasn't a newspaper. It was just online. And I took this job out of college, and I would tell people, my parents tell people back home what it was, and they'd say, "Oh, that's very nice. Now, what are you going to do to make some money?" Nobody thought you could make money just writing for an internet site. So I started out doing that. Covered Congress for a little while in D.C. For Roll Call, which was still a print product mainly at the time. New York Observer. I came back to New York to write for them. And what ended up happening was, I found as you write about politics, a lot of these talk shows end up just reaching out to people who write about politics to be guests, to be pundits, to be on air, So I sort of started doing that. And then I was on a pundit show on MSNBC. This goes back 12, 13 years ago, 2012. And did that for a couple of years. And then I remember the big thing was Chuck Todd had been doing election nights on MSNBC at the board. And I think it was the summer of 2014, he got the Meet the Press job, which meant he was not going to be able to do the board, Meet the Press for the 2014 election. And my boss called me and just sort of said, so I got this opening, I need somebody to do this. Do you think you could take a shot at it? And I was like, you have no idea, but I've been hoping to get that call for about 10 years.
That's awesome.
So here we go.
That's awesome. So one of the things I find is so important in, and something people, especially in Washington, tend to do is kind of talk over one another. And I think making concepts and information relatable to whoever you're talking to is incredibly important in business and in advocacy. You take these disparate data sets and distill them down into something that people can actually follow and understand. And it's incredibly fast moving. What's the key to doing that?
I feel like I'm still figuring it out in some ways. Although one thing that I've learned over time, I feel, and I've learned this through mistakes. But I said at the beginning, I'm interested in numbers. I kind of think in numbers. It's kind of how I understand the world. I have to realize that a lot of people don't think in numbers and don't understand the world through numbers. They understand the world in other ways that I probably not as inclined to. So for me, it's like simplify, because I have found myself on the air. The worst moments on the air for me are when I realize I've kind of gotten lost in the weeds. I've put all these different numbers out there, all these nuances, and it's not going to register with anybody. I'm realizing. So I've decided it's like I kind of have a rule of two that I try to keep to if they're coming to me for a quick 2-minute hit or something. Have a number, and then have a second number. It's a point of reference. Okay. So it's I would say like if we're looking at the result of a county somewhere, right? Like let's say we were in North Carolina, and okay, Trump has just won 52% of the vote in this county. Well, the second number that I want to see is what did Trump get there in 2020? Because now it makes sense. Yeah, if he was at 55% in 2020, this is bad. If he was at 45% in 2020, this is good. And so I don't want to. I try to make that a principle. It doesn't have to just be election results, but just have some way of comparing whatever number I'm showing people, as you say, a reference point, just so people can understand, like, basically, is this good? Is this bad? And make sense of it that way.
And when you're in that room on election night and millions of people are watching you, is that a total adrenaline rush? Are you feeling panic? What's the feeling inside as it's all coming at you?
Not. I've talked to some people about this through the years. Put me in a room of 40 people and tell me to talk to them. I'm nervous.
Well, you're about to go in a room.
Yeah, you're about to do it to me, right? When you can see the faces, it's just totally different. When I'm looking into the camera, it's all theoretical. I don't feel it. I will feel like what I've found too is the longer I've gone on with this, it's been about 10 years now of doing it for these elections. The prep leading up to it is more and more stressful for me because I think the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know and how much I'm just not going to know going into an election night. And sort of that awareness of where I have blind spots and my limitations really, I found I feel more anxiety each new election that I do. So I feel that kind of when we're coming on the air, I'm just trying, I've tried in my head to anticipate all sorts of different potential scenarios leading up to an election night. But then there's what was the Mike Tyson line? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. And that usually we go on at 7:00 and they get punched in the face about 7:02 every year. So
that's hilarious. So, and I'm just curious, what's the vibe like with the anchors? Is there camaraderie? Or is it kind of isolated?
Yeah, I'm very like kind of off in my wherever I've been. This year I did. I'm with NBC now, and we did a special on NBC News Now, which this is get everybody out there. This is our streaming platform, our free streaming platform. Everybody check out NBC News Now. But a similar setup where you've got the anchor desk, they've got guests coming in to talk with them, and then I'm kind of in a corner 15 yards away from them, something like that. So I can see them in the room. If I raise my voice, they can hear me. I can hear them. But really, it's me. If I see something, trying to signal to them, or trying to whisper. I got they can hear me in the control room,
Sure.
trying to whisper to them, to put me on. But sometimes I'll just catch some of the things that they're saying at the desk, but other times I just have no idea what they're even talking about.
So speaking of election night coverage, we just had an election. Interesting results to say the least. The Democrats, certainly in the larger races, ran the table. What's your big takeaway coming out of the recent election?
Yeah, I mean, it was a good night for Democrats. It was a bad night for Republicans, and I don't think there's any. I don't think that's oversimplifying it. Look, I understand these were, Virginia and New Jersey are blue states. They're states that Kamala Harris won last year, but she won Virginia by just under 6. She won New Jersey by just under 6. We're talking about, like 15 points in Virginia, 13 points in New Jersey. And not only that, we're talking about New Jersey where, Trump in 2024, that was one of his biggest improvements of any state in the country in 2024 was Jersey. He made huge gains with non-white voters in New Jersey in particular. And there was a lot of talk for the past year from Republicans about moving New Jersey to swing state status. They had a nominee, Jack Ciattarelli, who had run in 2021, who had nearly won in 2021. Even Democrats I would talk to during the campaign in New Jersey felt that their candidate, Mikey Sherrill, who's proving not to be a good candidate. They were very nervous that she was blowing the election. And in the end, it's just a landslide for Mikey Sherrill. So the question, I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff in the results in each state about demographic groups and trends and things like that. But I would say the big question that I have coming out of it is this, was it so bad for Republicans because of the shutdown? Because our own NBC poll, which came out just before the election, found a majority of voters blaming Republicans or President Trump for the shutdown. So, and I think the sort of the coverage, the awareness of the shutdown has really intensified in the last week or two, especially as it's become about travel and airlines and these sorts of things. So I am wondering if the Democrats opened up a large but temporary advantage because of the shutdown that we saw in our poll, that was reflected in these results, and that could change, assuming this shutdown is resolved, at some point here in the near future. I think that's my one question. Was this was a very good night for Democrats? Was it exaggerated by the shutdown? Or, the one thing the Democrats might tell you is that, the shutdown has this is going to linger. This has created a definition in voters' minds about the parties, and it's going to redound to Democrats' benefit going forward. But I do wonder if the climate will stay like this when the shutdown ends. If it does, the Republicans are in deep trouble next year.
I do think it's interesting because the criticism among Democrats of Democrats and among independents of Democrats is where's the backbone? Where's the fight? I mean, Trump's he dominates everything, first of all, but and certainly news coverage, it's like all Trump all the time. But there's been no Democratic pushback, no visible kind of defining pushback, I would say, over the first year of the Trump presidency. But obviously they were doing something right from a political point of view, at least, because they cleaned his clock on, a couple of weeks ago.
And I think that's one of the reasons I think this has to be concerning for Republicans, because for the first part of this year, right up to Election Day, one of the things that Republicans were really focused on in the polling was that the Democratic Party image was just in the basement.
Yeah, terrible.
Some of the worst numbers either party's ever seen. And this is in our poll, every poll. And so the case Republicans were making was, hey, look, Trump's approval ratings may be in the mid-40s, and it may not be great for Trump and Republicans, but people don't want to vote for this alternative. And again, I allowing that these are blue states, but the margins are so big in these places, they were more than willing to vote for the Democrats, even with those low numbers for Democrats. And I think a lot of that you have to end up realizing, too, is a lot of the reason the Democratic number is so low is what you were just describing. It was Democrats themselves saying, this party's a bunch of cowards, but that doesn't mean they're going to vote Republican.
And so what does this mean for the midterms next year? I guess that's the elephant in the room, right? Like, what's the question? What does it mean? That's the question. What does it mean going forward? Does it carry through all the way to next year? I think my personal view is if they get it done before Thanksgiving, so that it doesn't impact Thanksgiving, it probably fades from people's minds. But you're the expert, so.
Well, there it is. That's so I look at it this way. We are always tracking the generic ballot, they call it, right? Asking which party do you want to control Congress? And I just think it's a great measure over time. We've got decades of data showing how this. So as a point of reference, in Trump's first term, you remember the 2018 midterm, it was a blue wave election. Republicans, lost the House. Okay. Consistently from the summer of 2017 on, the generic ballot was like an 8-point advantage for Democrats, 6, 8, 10 points, depending on the poll. They were always ahead. They were always far ahead. And that absolutely translated into a blue wave in 2018. So in the second Trump administration, we've been looking at the generic ballot from the start and saying, is it going to be doing that again? And the answer for the spring and summer and into the fall was no. Our generic ballot, when we measured it back in the spring, had the Democrats up by 1 point. Republicans would be thrilled if the generic ballot is only 1 point. And other polls were finding the same thing. The Sunday before this election, just last week, we took our latest NBC poll, and it had the Democrats ahead by 8 on the generic ballot. So something changed. Trump's approval had come down a few points. Yeah. The generic ballot had opened up. And when you look at these results in Virginia and New Jersey, they're totally consistent with an 8-point Democratic advantage on the generic ballot. So if this is now the new atmosphere for the next year, as it was in 2018, the Republicans have a majority in the House. It's 2 seats. They can lose up to 2 seats, and that's it. So the House is gone, even with all this talk of redistricting in other states and everything. If it's an 8-point generic ballot, the House is gone for Republicans. It's what you're saying about the shutdown, and this is what I'm sort of dying to know. The next time we're in the field and we do the generic ballot, if the shutdown is over, is it still 8? Is it 9? Is it 7? Is it 10? Is it back down to 2 or 3? Because that Republicans, believe me, they are the relief you will hear from Republicans if this shutdown gets resolved. And let's say it's the middle of December and we take a generic ballot poll and it's 47-45 Democrats. Oh, the relief from Republicans will be enormous because they'll be able to say, all right, this election was a bit of an exaggerated, blip, but we'll see.
I'll tell you, for what it's worth, in every meeting, not every meeting, but a lot of the meetings I'm in with the administration, the presumption is we've got until January of 2027 to get done what we're going to get done. And, that's our period to legislate, and then that goes away. So I think they're planning in a lot of ways for essentially this 2-year majority. Yeah. And that's what history shows anyway, is the House flips, right? So
only 3 times in the last century has the White House party gained seats, in a midterm election. And they were all, Great Depression, impeachment, 9/11. These are your 3 circumstances.
And is that anti-incumbency? It seems like Biden's in the White House, the Republicans come out. If Trump's in the White House, the Democrats come out. Is this just whoever's in the Oval, the population moves against them? Is that?
Yeah, I always think it's, look, unless the president has a super high approval rating. Yeah. But, he's at 43%, in our poll right now. Biden, in his term was in the low 40s at best. I always feel that the advantage for the opposition party in an off-year election, the midterm election, is simply that they become the protest vehicle. So it's to a lot of voters, these elections become referendums on the party that's got power. And everybody's got different objections, different gripes, whatever. But if you want to express it, the way to express it is to vote for the opposition party. And again, like Republicans felt that the incredibly low numbers for Democrats were going to disrupt that maybe. And people were actually going to have pause about using the Democrats as the protest vehicle. But I think at least right now, in this climate, seeing what happened in Jersey and Virginia, and elsewhere, but they did not have that reservation here.
So one other thing I've been grappling with is whether candidates still matter. And I've been saying, we've been saying on our podcast, candidates matter, candidates still matter. I'm not sure after what happened, candidates still matter. You referenced Mikey Sherrill. I'm a Jersey guy. She's got a compelling background on paper, somewhat moderate national security woman candidate for governor is on paper a compelling narrative, but by all accounts, she ran a poor campaign and wasn't connecting with voters. And I was talking to my friends in New Jersey, which way is this going? I don't know. New Jersey has a tradition of electing Republican governors, Chris Christie, Todd Whitman. So it's not like Republican governors in New Jersey are an isolated phenomenon. Chitterelli did well last time. But she, like you said, it was a landslide. So is that all just a reaction to Donald J. Trump?
I think it is. You remember the old, this goes back a ways, but Tip O'Neill, who was the House Speaker back in the 1980s, and he had this famous line, all politics is local. And I don't think it's right anymore. I think all politics is national. And to me, that's what happened in New Jersey. It was interesting to watch. As I say, I started out covering Jersey, so I consider it my adopted home state. And
two Jersey guys.
Yeah, there you go. And I talk to people there frequently, and look, Cheryl got the Democratic nomination because the party establishment looked at what you're saying, the biography and the victory in a suburban swing congressional district. She was the electable candidate. They were sure. And boy, they were not sure in the fall. And, there was an ad that ran. I thought this was a devastating ad from the Republicans where they took Cheryl. She was on a WCBS talk show in New York City. Asked the question, what's the first thing you would do as governor? And she just hemmed and hawed for 30 seconds, had no answer. And the ad was they just played the full 30 seconds. That was it. No voiceover or anything. And I'm watching this and I'm like, this has just got it. This is a killer. Yeah. This is another dated reference. But remember the whole story about Ted Kennedy's presidential campaign imploding because, he was asked, why do you want to be president by Roger Mudd? And he couldn't answer it. And the whole thing. And I felt like it was an equivalent moment. Not at all. Not at all. Didn't matter at all. I think all of the sort of groundwork that Chitterelli had laid with his previous campaign didn't matter at all. I'm not sure state issues mattered. I think this thing was driven by attitudes, at the national level about Trump, about national politics, about the two parties. And in New Jersey, in this climate, with the generic ballot becoming Democrats +8, that's what the result's going to look like.
Yes. So speaking of the two parties, it just feels like the extremes, although there were some moderates elected. I mean, Abigail Spanberger in Virginia is a moderate Democrat, but look at New York. I mean, the New York City, the extremes certainly dominate at the primary level. What's the future of party politics? I feel like most people are in the middle. 80% of the country generally agrees within some realm of reason on most things. But you've got this division between the two parties. Is there any chance we could see a change in our party architecture going forward?
Yeah, it's hard for me to see because I think you mentioned New York City. The way I kind of look at that is I don't think New York City is different than any state in the country. So I don't think it says anything about broad sort of general election. I think it does say something about what's going on inside the Democratic Party. That's how I always view New York City election. It's basically like a giant Democratic
proxy
primary. Yeah. And I think the thing that stuck out most to me was the age divide. And if he's 45 years old is where it really kind of divides. Voters 45 and older went for Cuomo by double digits. Voters under 45 went for Mamdani by 44 points. Voters under 30 went for Mamdani by 61 points. And if you split that one level further and looked at like gender, female voters under 30 went for Mamdani by like 82 points.
Wow.
So, and we have seen a bit of this nationally in the Democratic Party with Bernie Sanders. Sanders had about 45 years old. There was a huge divide with his support as well. So I think there is an energy in the Democratic Party that has a lot to do with age and generation. I think gender plays a role in it, where that sort of leftist style of politics, whether it's Mamdani, whether it's Bernie Sanders, AOC, I'm not sure who the vehicle might be nationally, but I think there's an energy for it. I don't know exactly how big that's going to be, but when people talk about like, if AOC were to run for president, in 2028, would you take her seriously? I in a Democratic primary, I have to.
Yeah.
I think you have to. Because I mean, again, like if that age divide, there's a lot of voters. There's a lot of voters over 45. There's a lot of voters under 45 too.
That youth engagement I find to be a fascinating topic. I mean, if you look on the other side of the aisle, so to speak, one of the things I was struck by with the obviously very sad circumstance of the Charlie Kirk assassination that prompted a lot of discussion among people my age of, well, who is this guy?
Yeah.
And to my shock, like I had conversations with my 15-year-old son. Yeah, of course, Dad, I know who he is. And he's not particularly politically engaged. But, I said, we were talking about Israel and his support for Israel. And my son said, Dad, you should listen to what he said about Israel. And I said, did you listen to that before he was assassinated and that became the biggest national news? And the answer was yes, for a long time. And maybe I should have a better sense of what my kid watches on TikTok. But the fact is, kids are consuming content, I think, on both sides of the aisle in a way that's driving engagement. That's probably good for the country, but it's on both sides of the aisle where there's more youth engagement.
Well, you're putting your finger on something that I think about a lot, and that is just this, like, how diffuse media has become and how difficult that makes understanding politics. And I think it's absolutely related to what we're talking about with that age divide, with the rise in the Democratic Party, with the rise of leftist politics. But there's certainly stuff going on in the Republican Party as well. And I look at it as, when you don't have to go back too far in time. Remember the big three networks: ABC, CBS, NBC.
Yeah.
And everybody would watch one of them, and you'd watch the nightly news, and 30 million people watched one of the nightly newscasts.
Sure.
And when I go back and look at like sort of modern political history and try to piece it together, I find it's relatively easy to do in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, because you see where the information was coming from that was shaping the public opinion, that was driving the politics. Now, if you ask me, where is it coming from today, especially for the TikTok generation, I have no idea. And it's coming from a million different directions. And it's not even, these are not like, a lot of this stuff is not easy to find. And it's not a show that's scheduled to air at 6:30 that I can tune into and see. Right. And you find, and some of it is even, now I'm going to, it's that, I forgot that they're gamers, they say, right? So somebody's sitting there playing a video game and just offering commentary about the world while playing a video game for 3.5 hours.
Right.
I don't have time to go and watch the guy play the video game, but this is apparently
it's what 15-year-old boys are doing.
Yeah.
It's quite a world. It's definitely changing. And look, we're sitting here recording a podcast that didn't exist 15 years ago. So there you go. So Steve, you go from breaking down Pennsylvania politics to the NFC playoffs, the playoff picture. How did you move from politics to sports? Because you're now doing both NBC News and NBC Sports, which has got to be incredible for you. I'm sure. I know we talked over lunch at how incredible a journey it's been. How did that happen?
I mean, luck. I'm grateful for it. I mean, I was always interested in numbers. So, I mean, that was like sports from as far back as I can remember. You know, I wake up, grew up in Massachusetts, get the Boston Globe. Page 4 was baseball every day, and you get to the box scores and, you know, the pitching matchups, all of that, Celtics games. So I always was into it. And there was a point in my career way back when I was sort of starting out, like trying to figure out, you know, what I could do. I was interested in trying to get into, you know, sports journalism if I could. Just it worked out that it was politics. But what happened was after the 2020 election, you know, the NBC Sports, this is November 2020, so the playoff race is heating up, and they got in touch with my boss and basically said, you know, could you ask Steve if he'd be interested in coming on Football Night in America, the pregame show on NBC, to talk about the playoff scenario. So I was like, obviously like thrilled that they asked. My immediate second thought was sort of like, I just want to make sure this isn't a gimmick. You know, or it's like, oh, haha, here's the guy with the pants and the sleeves, and we're, you know, going to shout a few things about numbers. And what we came up with, I thought actually it flowed perfectly from what I had just spent the election doing road to 270 scenarios. You know, like if Trump wins Wisconsin but loses Michigan and gets Georgia, he's got a 42% chance. But if he wins Carolina, you know, that sort of thing. And that's what the playoff scenarios are. You know, if the Ravens win this week and the Chargers, you know, lose to the Chiefs, you know, then and so we teamed up with PFF. It's called Pro Football Focus. It's a data analytics firm, and we just do playoff scenarios. You know, back half of the season. It's an incredible experience to get to go up Stamford, Connecticut's where NBC Sports is based. So I drive up there on Sundays, and they got a room where the whole crew is there to watch the games. You know, 1 o'clock. You know, so I've been in there. I remember the first time I was in there. You know, I'm like, we're watching all the 1 o'clock games. They got different screens in there, and then it's like 2 rows in front of me is Tony Dungy, and I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like,
that's awesome.
So
it's
been a cool experience.
That's fantastic. And of course, since New Jersey's now your adopted home state, you're a Giants fan instead of a Patriots fan, right?
As I plead the fifth here.
Okay.
You want me to be a Giants fan after what they've done to the
my
Patriots?
God.
You just want to rub that one in.
That's true. That's true. Well, I wound up, oddly enough, in a conversation with Mike Tirico down in Augusta at the Masters, and I was with one of my partners, and we said, Mike, what interests you outside of sports? And he said politics. So I know he's a big political junkie.
Can I tell you, this has been my experience. The people who do politics want to do sports, and the people who do sports want to do politics. There's a lot of overlap there.
That's interesting. So do you get recognized more these days by political junkies or sports fanatics?
I guess it varies. The one that always like gets me that I like is I also get to do horse racing for NBC Sports.
I saw
that is my number one.
The Breeders' Cup. Right?
Yeah, I was just out in San Diego for that, and you know we do the Derby, the Preakness, a couple of others. So I mean that's my number one sport, and I love doing that. And getting to like be at Saratoga in the summer. And then people, when they see what I like about that is when they recognize you and they come up to you then, they just want to like compare notes on the races. Oh, who do you like in this race? Here's who I like. That, and I love that kind of talk. So that's my favorite.
That's awesome. Happens. Well, that's been all about the odds forever.
Yep.
And I feel like sports in general has become much more about, I mean, as betting's been legalized, it's much more about the analytics and the numbers, which plays to exactly what you do. People are so into it. And I guess fantasy football, the same thing. And so it all seems like it's trending in your direction, Steve.
Well, yeah, we'll see if there's a backlash on this betting stuff, you know, with this investigation, these indictments and everything. I'm wondering if that's the next phase of this. But yes, definitely a lot of numbers involved.
God, I hope not, because I feel like it's the one thing we have left that actually brings people together.
Sports.
Oh,
no question. Yeah.
Like
I mean, just the gambling. I
know.
But
like,
yeah, I'm with you on that.
Do we have to challenge the credibility of sports too? Not you and me, but Like, does something bad have to happen that calls into question the integrity of sports?
Yeah,
It's
I
like,
know.
let's keep one thing sacred.
I know.
Competition. It's crazy, the gambling stuff that's come out, but hopefully it's not too widespread.
Yeah.
So in a business context, as we were saying earlier, you've mastered the art of making the complex simple for people in the boardroom, whether they're thinking of you on Sunday Night Football or the Breeders' Cup or election night. What advice do you have for business executives that are trying to take complex concepts and simplify them and convey them to an audience in a compelling way?
Yeah, I always just, if you're putting a number up, as I said earlier, always have some point of reference to compare to that people will understand, so they can make sense of that number. I just think numbers in isolation, I always, here's an example. This used to drive me nuts, just reading about elections, news stories about elections. I would hear like, well, in the Ohio Senate race, so-and-so won by 68,000 votes. And I can remember just reading the article in isolation. I have no idea what that means. Because if there were like, if 200,000 people voted, that's a landslide. If 2 million people voted, that's a closer election. Give me, so it's like, think about the number you're throwing out at somebody. And like in the context you're throwing that number out, does this make any sense to people?
Yeah.
And if not, make it make sense for them by giving them something to compare it to. So I always kind of think of that. Yeah. I just,
and how about intuition? I mean, does intuition in your world matter? Are you so into the data that you don't use your gut at all to assess where things are coming out, whether it's football or...
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Well, I mean, definitely with like, okay, so I mentioned horse racing, or this would apply to football too, but like, yeah, in horse racing is a good one only because I am betting on it all the time, but that's what the sport is.
There you go.
And there's definitely gut there. I will override my, read of the numbers. The recent one in politics was the New York City mayor's race, where in the last couple weeks, my gut was telling me that it was closing, that the anti-Mamdani vote was consolidating. I wasn't so far as like, oh yeah, Cuomo's going to win, but I was looking at polls that had, Mamdani ahead by 15, 20 points, thinking to myself, I feel like this might be going to single digits here. There's one pollster who put it in single digits, and that pollster was way off everywhere else on Tuesday. So, it was a challenge for me. Like we ended up doing a feature on it on the air before the election. And I sort of framed it as, I was careful in how I framed it because I wanted to get it out there to folks that, hey, there might be something worth watching here, and here are the ingredients that would go into that. I don't want to overstate it because because the numbers were all telling me Mamdani's likely to win this pretty big. My gut was telling me I think something else is happening. And it landed, it landed at 8-9 points, which I would say was, I think there was something happening there. It just wasn't big enough to make it, but it wasn't the blowout that a lot of those polls were suggesting.
Got it. So, Steve, this is a challenging question, but we end every podcast with a segment that we call the Beltway exit. So we're getting off the Beltway now, but if there is data that you're looking at that makes you hopeful about the future of the country, one is there, and two, what is it? I personally feel like there is. I'm always optimistic about the future of the country. I feel like we have a couple 100-year history, not a 250-year history, not a 2,000-year history, but the country's strong. We've been through a lot. I I feel like I said earlier, like most people agree on more than they disagree on, but we spend so much time on division and kind of cultural divide. But are there things you see in data that make you feel hopeful?
This might be one of those gut versus numbers things too, huh? It's like, because I think of the numbers that I look at, and I mean, honestly, it's like to be in politics is to just see a steady stream of numbers that speak to division and polarization and tribalism and all these sorts of things. But I think a little bit of what you're saying, to recognize the divisions that have existed, in the history of this country, how deep they've been at time. I mean, this is a country that had a civil war. I mean, among other things. And I think the optimism comes maybe more from, I always tell people, it's sort of like, I don't know what the way out of this is, but I do know that if we all get sick of it enough, human beings are endlessly innovative, creative, imaginative, and we can find a way out of this.
Yeah.
So I think there's something there. And I also think it's just like, and I think there's just a thing with technology, and maybe there's some coming to terms with technology, and maybe I know a lot of schools now are starting to they ban the phones during the day. A lot of parents are sort of like banning their kids from having phones. I only say because it's like there's so much division. There's always been so much division in this country, but it's now thrown in everybody's face constantly. Yeah. You just take out your phone. You're standing with 2 minutes of idle time. What do? You take out your phone and you're on TikTok or Instagram, whatever you're on.
Yeah.
And what are you getting? You're just getting here's somebody you follow telling you that this person's the worst today, or this, and it's just
reinforcement of what you already think.
Correct. That's it. And just the siloing effect of that. And so I don't know. Maybe there's some evolution in our relationship with technology that I think maybe brings the temperature down. Good.
Well, we'll end on that hopeful note.
There you go.
Steve, thank you so much for making the time. You're the voice that so many Americans look to, both for football and for politics. And I really appreciate you making the time. It's very meaningful that you came on, and hopefully this sheds a little light on what we're seeing out there in the country. And thank you again for joining our In Conversation With series.
We stand today
A date which will live in infamy.
I have a dream.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.